Power comes from culture. That's what Sister Marimba was talking about. That's where power comes from. Power doesn't come from voting. Power doesn't come from, owning a store. Power comes from your being in control of your definition of reality, being defined by your history, your philosophy, your social reality. And from that, you understand the importance of owning the store, of owning the city, owning the state, owning the country, owning the world, that only from that base. And I think that erroneous conceptions running rampant in our community is that we don't understand power because we don't understand culture. And I think that that's why we deny that we are a cultural people. I mean, we'll have blood out here, serious and sincere about mounting a change. Out here on the battlefront, talking about liberating the African mind and never mention our cultural reality. Never even give any legitimacy to it. And so what happens then is that we're talking about liberating ourselves as black-skinned white people, not as people. And so we don't develop an African objective, an African purpose, and therefore extract an African outcome for that. So I think that it's very important that this construct of cultural misorientation become an understandable one for us. Because I think if it doesn't, we are going to continue to be walking around here like we have our heads cut off, trying to solve problems where the answers are right under our nose. And we are hiring somebody with a PhD or somebody else to go find it for us, and it's right there. And they going way out of town looking, kind of thing. And charging you a lot of money to do it, in that regard. So I think that, that this construct is very critical, I think, to getting us in a sense of that. Let me just say one more thing about it before I go on. That, I think that one thing we have to recognize about our condition as African people is to be African under white supremacy domination is an unnatural situation. See, there's nothing natural about that. And African people must recognize that. But white domination, miseducation of African people, have us accepting that as possibly normal, a normal way of life or a natural way of life, that's okay. All we want to do is own a house, be able to have somebody on the city council, have something that ultimately is strictly white supremacy domination system. See, because if we're not out to destroy it, everything that we do is doing nothing more than reinforcing it. No matter how much we participate in it and how much we think we can strain out of that participation, so long as we try to participate in it, we are giving legitimacy to it, and therefore we are in fact reinforcing its existence. So I think that we have to be very careful about this cultural misorientation, because in the ranks of leadership among our people, that's where you find it most forcefully manifested. In the ranks of leadership among our, now it's everywhere, don't get me wrong, but it is very severely manifested in the ranks of leadership of African people, because they think they understand power, and even more absurdly, they think they understand white supremacy domination, and they are the biggest casualties of it, because they actually believe that they can achieve African liberation by working through a structure that white supremacy domination created. And not only will they try to convince us of the legitimacy of that, they will try to bring punishing consequences to bear upon us if we don't comply. Whether it's through name calling or withdrawing social status and social recognition from us, and that can go in all kinds of ways, in concrete ways like fire you, lose your job, all kinds of other things, so that we will get our African selves in line with white supremacy domination. So I think that's I call this book a wake-up call for the African world, because I think that we're just like drug addicts, you know. I think we are addicted to the European worldview. And withdrawal is a very challenging process. It's a very challenging process. If you know anything about addiction, it takes all the energy you got, you see, to try to and get out of that, to get out from under the weight, you see, of that addiction. And you will come up with every justification and rationalization you can, you see, to in fact reinforce it. I often use this analogy. I've been been fortunate enough, I guess, to be involved in the more progressive wings of this liberation movement for the last 20 years. And I've tried to be a keen observer because when I entered it, I was rather young. And to watch and see what was going on, you know, and see what we do and seem to be doing right and what seemed to be working and what we seem to be doing wrong. And one observation I've come out of that experience with is that we have as many contradictions in the most progressive movements of African liberation as we have anywhere else in the African community, as any place else. Notice everybody got a little quiet on that one. But the point I'm making is that, you see, we got so much baggage that we have collected in our sojourn under white supremacy domination that I use this analogy about, say, if the African liberation train has been announced, you know, it's going to leave the station next week at 8 a.m. and all serious-minded Africans should be at the station to get on so we can liberate ourselves from white supremacy domination. Now, we're not talking about Africans who are confused about the Afrikaners and all that. We're talking about the ones who say they're ready. That's the group we're talking about now. I would submit to you that when the fog lifts that morning, you know, on Liberation Day, the train is leaving the station, and all the brothers and sisters gather, everybody's going to have these duffel bags, you know. And just imagine the wisdom of the ancestors designed the entryway, you know, onto the train. Very narrow, such that just you can get through it. What you think's going to happen? Blood's going to be trying to get through that door with them duffel bags, get stuck in the door. And here come a wise elder, you know, one of the conductors on the train, one of our wise elders, come along and give some, you know, well, maybe if you try to leave that duffel bag, you can get home. I said, no, I can't leave this, brother. It's too important. I got some important things in here. And can you imagine if we had something like customs, you know, when you come through? So they say, okay, this is chaotic now. Hey, wait a minute. We didn't plan for this. Let's dump these bags out here. Let's see what's in here. You justify, you know, this stuff you're trying to get through here so we can get the train moving. And blood started dumping out those bags. I would suggest to you that we would try to justify every last thing in the bag. Whether it's some alien religion. No, man, I need this. I'm committed to it. I got to keep it. This is me, you know. Whether it's all these Eurocentric like cosmetics. No, I can't live without this stuff. I got, you know, that's me. I can't leave that. Hey, listen to this one. These Eurocentric names. I said, no, I can't leave this stuff behind. I wouldn't know myself by any other name. How can I leave that? You see? I'm talking about in the progressive circles of African life. I have witnessed this. You see? I mean, I've been in a situation where we've been harmony, getting ready to lay out the plan and getting ready to action plan. And all of a sudden, we stepped on somebody's toe, something in their bag. We stepped on them. They said, wait a minute. The whole meeting broke up into disintegration and started talking about what's in the bag. And here we talking about we getting ready to mount an offensive against white supremacy domination. And all of a sudden, I mean, we were moving in harmony, everybody's rolling the rhythm until we infringe upon somebody's duffel bag. And all of a sudden, everybody goes back and draws out their duffel bag. And now we got the duffel bags are between us. You see? They are between African people. All this junk that we have collected from white supremacy domination is in the way. And I contend that we've got to have specific rituals that allow us to resolve that problem before it continues to occur. It seems to me that our scholars should recognize that we have been studying this problem long enough to be able to recognize what some of our fundamental deficits are and build in correctives of those deficits before they destroy our thrust toward victory. And therefore we need rituals. As the sister was saying, we need, see, there are rituals that we should go back into our African traditions and bring some rituals forward just as they are intact. Because they mean something, you see, intact. You can't separate them outside, you see, and put in and fragment them. You must bring them full-fledged for the spiritual integrity of them, you see, to achieve its vitality and expression. But the African, you see, experience is transformative. It didn't stop with Kemet. It didn't stop with traditional West African civilization. This is a part of it too. This happens to be a highly distorted and confused and disordered part of it. But it's still a part of the legitimate African experience. Once we come through the transformation of African consciousness, we'll understand that. We'll understand that it's not just that you were born in continental Africa, so we say those are Africans, we the blacks, or we the Afro-Americans, or we prefix, you see. We're not just Africans like them. Or as a brother, I don't mean to offend anybody, but a brother called on the phone the other day, say we 50-50. You know, so we're not African, we 50-50. 50 something else and 50 Africans. So we got to give equal weight, equal time to the something else. We won't even deal with what that one is until a little later. But it's talking about the something else again. And that's defined, the something else is defining who we are and reducing, you see, the substance of the Africanity. And so what happened, that's baggage, you see, that's all it is, that's double bag. That's a double bag coming up again. And we all got them. We all got them. And if we don't go through this self-searching process that Sister Marimba talked about, those duffel bags are just going to always be, we'll lay them in the corner until we need them, that's all. Until somebody offends us. And then we, open it out, lay it on the table, and everybody else say, hey, I got mine too then. There goes the plan. There goes the plan. Now I know some of us in this room, I know we've been in this movement for a long time and we have seen this happen. We have seen it happen. Get to the point of getting ready to get into some substantive action. And all of a sudden, all this disharmony, all these other agendas start hitting the table. And we leave the room mad at each other. Well, we didn't go get physical, feeling like we should have. We didn't get the satisfaction and so on and so forth. That's dangerous, brothers and sisters. We got to come into a sense of this reality. We will never be able to even think victoriously, and let alone be able to then envision actual victory. And so I believe that the way we begin to correct ourselves from this cultural misorientation or engage in the African healing process is that we can't continue to make this error that we always make of trying to start at step 10, assuming or presuming that somebody, I guess that means white supremacy, or somebody has taken care of steps 1 through 9. Because we want to act, again, we get caught up in this equivalence with Europeans. And so therefore we want to say, well, we straight. I mean, we done purged out all of this baggage. We ready to go. So we're going to go on and start with point 10. Let's go get us a store. Let's go, start us a school or so on and so forth, or what have you. When we haven't done the groundwork, you see, that lays the foundation for that to come into being. And so I think that that's what we have to do. If we're going to really develop a victorious plan, and I consistently challenge us throughout that manuscript about that, then first of all, somebody has to have the vision, the audacity, the courage, the African-centered courage or audacity to envision a master plan. And articulate that plan to the best of their ability, drawing upon the collective wisdom of African people to our people. We must have a purpose for what we're doing. You can't go out and tell African people, well, you got to stop raising your children that way so they'll stop fighting. Come on now, that's not going to work. We got to have a plan that we can give to all African people, because those over here say, well, mine not fighting. You know, what about mine? I'm still having a problem. They're not fighting, but they don't want to do their schoolwork, or they don't want to, whatever. We're having some problems with them. I think we have to envision, what is it that we need? And I contend if we go back and study our history and study this encroachment of the European, we will find that what they have destroyed about African people is our cultural infrastructure. And so that's what we must rebuild if we are going to mount a victorious struggle against white supremacy domination. We can't do that as individual Africans. We can't do that as a couple of us who mad and we, got our energy. We're going to go, kick some white supremacy behind. You see, we have to develop a systematic, if you will, for lack of a better term, scientific methodology for liberating ourselves. See, if you're serious, that's one thing I'll always say about Brother Bobby. He was always true to the fact that Brother Bobby believed in victory. He wasn't just out there struggling to be struggling. Said if we're going to struggle, we're struggling to win. Not to win some skirmishes against white supremacy domination, but to literally defeat it. And the only way he saw us defeating it is that we must reclaim control of the world. Now, you can say, well, that's a tall order. That's abstract, Baldwin. That's kind of out there, given the fact that we sitting back here can't even control our blocks. Many of us can't control our houses, our homes, in that regard. So it becomes a tall order to say we got to control the world. But again, I contend that's the fault of our scholarship. You see, our scholarship is supposed to be laying out the paradigm for this liberation movement. And I think that if we don't somehow lay out the master plan, we have no way of connecting the various isolated liberation projects that are going on all over the African community. They are independent projects, you see. Meaningful, but not nearly as meaningful as if they were brought under the umbrella of a mega objective of African world order, of what I call a Pan-African world nation building. That we have to develop an objective that say we want to reclaim the world. We can't be talking about reclaiming Washington, D.C. Oh, we got to talk about the world. And then reclaiming the turf of Washington, D.C. makes sense because it's a part of our long-term developmental plan of retaking the world. Retaking our homes, then retaking our neighborhoods, then retaking our blocks, then retaking our cities, then makes sense. You see. Otherwise, we're just retaking them to work them through for white supremacy domination all the time. If we have no other agenda, then we can't claim anything. We can't claim this plan is about anything. Because if they run in the world and we run our neighborhoods, they're going to construct a policy that say neighborhoods got to run like such and we will enforce that policy. You see? So the neighborhood control plan has to be linked to the world control plan. Otherwise, we're wasting our time. We are in a fantasy. We are playing with this struggle. We are not struggling to win, you see. And so I think that if this model does anything, it tries to locus this African personality within the liberation movement so that it thrusts us toward the real objective of the African liberation movement. And that is for African people to run the world again. Not for us to participate in a world controlled by white supremacy domination. You are not going to be able to integrate with white supremacy domination. That is mentally disordered thinking. You see. in formal circles of psychiatry and psychology, we call that fantasy thinking. You see, and when you're living in a fantasy world, something's wrong with you. You see. And we have a whole lot of fantasy defining the African condition under white supremacy domination. We have a whole lot of fantasy. A very important thing that I think we lost in this cultural infrastructure under white supremacy domination is we lost respect for and a sense of accountability to our ancestors. Yes. We don't show any respect for the Africans who made it possible for us to be here today. And you know what? Same thing occurs or characterizes these progressive centers of the African liberation movement. That in all of this progressiveness that we've established, why is it that nobody, no great insight has occurred that somebody say, well, we need a national shrine to let the world know, you see, what our ancestors went through so that we can commit ourselves to never permit it to happen again, you see. But how can we do that if we want to forget it? We want to operate in this amnesia because we've been so miseducated, so intimidated by white supremacy domination that they make us feel ashamed of our ancestors. We are ashamed. They make us feel like it's our fault. Like one of the callers made the other day said, these people have increased the quality of African life by brutalizing us, by raping us, by murdering us, by destroying us. How crazy can you get? That's insane. That is white supremacy logic. For an African person to be able to make such an insane statement, and no Africans are rushing to that person to get them in a straitjacket and get them some help. That person probably went down the street and got an award that night for something. You see, it is a chaotic world in which the African personality, you see, is striving for legitimacy under white supremacy domination because the contradiction is there. Africans under white supremacy domination and cultural misorientation can stand up before the whole world and make the most nonsensical, illogical statement and either be applauded for it, awarded for it, or given some extra bonus for it. And nobody is the wiser. And the next one of us say, well, better do the same thing. Yeah. And surely enough, somebody is on their heels, getting ready to engage in the same kind of insanity. I mean, it just makes no sense. Let me just tell you this one little experience I had in California in the mid-'70s, when Andy Young, I think, was the United Nations, yes, right, that thing. And President Amin was in power in Uganda. And the European press was going crazy. I mean, they were saying this is a wild man. I mean, he's murdering African people. He's disrespecting royalty from Europe, and these people, making them carry him around, like Botswana, like we carry them around, kind of thing. But it's crazy for him to do that and so on and so forth. And Andy Young was in Los Angeles at that time to accept an award from a black community group in Carson City, California, which is a predominantly black area, if you know anything about California. And on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, it said, it read, Young said Amin should be killed. That's what it said. Now here it is, a brother who's a man of the cloth, when all the contradictions that mean. and led the nonviolent movement, all this kind of stuff. Never uttered a word about Voister and any of them Europeans who had been killing African people for sport, blood still dripping from their hands at the time he was speaking. And he never even uttered their names look all the, they never mentioned the head of the Ku Klux and Klan, or any other European right here under his nose, looked all the way across the Atlantic, found this brother on the other side of Africa. I guess they say he was tall, so maybe that's why he could see him better. Found this brother, but Andy's kind of short, you know, found this brother way over there and moved him up to the head of the line of the most evil human beings on the planet. Mental insanity. And the next day, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times in the community section said, Young receives great award from the black community for so and so and so and so. Can you imagine that? Now, what kind of world, a sensible white supremacy domination world, think of African people who engage in that level of insanity? They or nobody else in their right mind could take crazy African people seriously, you see. How could they take us seriously when we engage in the craziest behavior that you can imagine? Even when we say we challenging them, we cutting them down, and so on and so on. I could give you some other examples that make you run me out of here, so I'll let you read the book. They're in the book. You know, because I'm telling you, we can mount an offensive against these Europeans and be a living contradiction as we stand there challenging them, you see. As we stand there challenging them in a most contradictory mode, a most gross contradictory mode that we can imagine, thinking that somebody's going to take us seriously, you see. Europeans know when you're mounting an African charge or when you're mounting a Negro charge, you see. They know the difference because they define the Negro charge. They define the parameters of that one. So they can predict it. They know what it's going to provide. And so they know when there's a real threat to their power base in the world, or whether it's, you know, them Negroes playing games again, you know, playing games like they hold people again, you know, what have you. So I think that if we don't reconnect with the Ma'afa, or the African Holocaust, we're going to be in trouble. Because I think it leaves a spiritual void in African people. That we're walking around here under this self-imposed amnesia, pretending that we are whole human beings. And here we are, don't want to remember the most recent part of our history. And yet we expect people in the world to take us seriously, and we'd have negotiation rights with people in the world. I mean, the fact that we don't show respect for our ancestors by commemorating their presence, you see, in the world. Just the fact of recognizing they were here. And they suffered. They ate slop with the animals so that they could see another day, so that their future generations could hopefully see a better day. Or went to those slave quarters at night, sore in the back and, you know, tired, beyond tired. You see, and tried to heal each other, and then crawl out, didn't even sleep in a bed like we do, you know, slept in something that makeshift kind of thing, and then crawled out that next morning before the sun went up and did it again. And again, and again. We can't even imagine that. And that's the appreciation we show them. Forget them. You see. Don't remember that they were even here. Don't hold anybody accountable. First of all, ourselves, you see, for their being here. And if we don't hold ourselves accountable, we won't hold anybody else accountable, you see. And I submit to you, that's why we don't hold anybody accountable for the desecration of African life. They do it, we do it, everybody does it, you see. Destroy African life without consequence, without consequence. Spiritually whole people would automatically have a structure of accountability. There is no way that we can claim spiritual wholeness and walk around here in a condition of psychological denial, you see, shameful of our ancestors who suffered, struggled, and died so that we could be here to see this possibility of liberation. It is a shame, brothers and sisters, It is worse than a shame that we continue to sit here in this contradiction, this cesspool of white disrespect for African life, and try to act like everything is normal and hunky-dory. That makes no sense. Or to sit here and act like we care about African people and we care about our children and care about our community, and we don't care about those who made it possible. That's a joke. That's an illness. That's serious. And see, that knows no boundaries in terms of the segmentation of our community. We all practice that amnesia. You see, we all practice that forgetfulness. You see, and go out and imitate European people in balls and all these other things that they do, create their Greek social orders, imitating them, have church, wedding, everything else like them, dress like them, present ourselves physically like them. Can you imagine what our ancestors must think of us? They wonder, what in the hell did they do all that suffering for? If their offspring are going to sit up here and disrespect them by dancing and romancing with their enemy. I mean, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. We got to have rituals in the book. I call for one ritual that I say we have to have a ritual, a specific ritual that I call African Identity Reclamation Ritual. And I think every African who lives under white supremacy domination must go through this rite. We must go through it, no exceptions. We have to, if we're going to talk about African renewal, African reclamation, the first step must be the renouncing of our affiliation, complicitness, overt, covert, conscious, unconscious, with white supremacy domination, the European worldview. We must renounce it. That must be the first phase of reclaiming the approval of our ancestors. Because we have disrespected them. And we have to go back and fetch it. We got to go back and reclaim them. Because we will never be whole so long as they haven't resumed their spiritual place in us. That's why we keep romancing their enemies, because we don't understand that their enemies are our enemies because we are them. And through ritual, you see, as Sister Marimba said, that's when we reclaim our rightful place as the ancestors, you see. So therefore, their rapist is our rapist. Their brutalizer is our brutalizer, you see. Their enemy is our enemy. And we understand that when they threw those Africans down on the shores of the Atlantic, they threw Africans down, not Negroes, not colored people, Africans. And then they brought out the guns, the whips, and all the other instruments of brutality and began to try to purge that Africanity out of these poor, wretched souls. And through the 300 or 400 years of purging, they led us to believe through miseducation that they extracted from us our basic African nature, when all they did was change our minds about that African nature. They made us want to deny it, disclaim it. And in doing so, we disclaim those ancestral spirits laying along the shores of the Atlantic. And I contend that's where they still are right now. That's a heavy spiritual zone. And we don't even go near it, you see. Because the only way we can go near it is through ritual. And we must do that if we are going to wage victorious war against white supremacy domination. We got to go back and get all of our armament. And we can't do it as hollow people, you see. We got to go back and fill up. So we got to spiritually go back to the banks of the Atlantic, reclaim our African selves, become whole again, you see. And then we're ready to wage victorious war against the enemies of African people. Because we know we're African. And we know that who Africa's enemies are. And then we don't have to debate this stuff about am I a Negro, colored, this, that, or whatever. Your great-great-great-great-grandmama was an African when they threw her down out of them slave ships on the shores of the Atlantic. And that's what you are. And no amount of brutality can change your basic nature. No amount of this miseducation with this inferior genetic strand can change the substantive nature of who you are. I guess how they're going to do that. You know, it's like the issue of, you got to, it's like substance versus, nothing. When you're going to say that, well, I got 50% of nothing in me and 50% of substance, I'm going to define myself by the nothingness. Yeah. That's illogical. You see, I'm going to find myself by the lack of substance rather than substance. That's illogical. That's illogical. So we here look like Africans and be sitting up here and say, I wonder if I'm 50% European, wonder if I'm 25% European, and so on and so forth. You see? Because this genetic mutant has control, you see, military control. So they can expect consequences, you see, to enforce and reinforce their reality. And so they have you, in fact, what? Reversing reality and saying, well, this mutant strand defines who I am. So if I got 25% of them, I'm not a real African. I'm a pseudo-African. I'm a part African. I'm a baby African. I'm a little bit African. I'm a qualified African, you see. And what have you, you see. That's dangerous logic. That's white supremacy logic.